Hey everybody, I'm Joe, and around here we like to talk about monsters. So it's fun to be able to crack open the monster manual or Monsters of the Multiverse and find something that is going to be a great villain for a full campaign or for a arc of a campaign. Dragons, liches, there's lots of great options. But a lot of campaigns really benefit from the full villain or the villain of a story arc being something that could be a playable character, something that you build to be a character several levels higher than your players are. And that makes this villain grounded, feel very real, feel almost like something the players could understand and identify with. It means that they can have real conversations that can be part of the story with your players. This is a fun way to build a villain. And anything that you build could, of course, be the villain of your story. Any class and subclass could work. But I've got 5 particular favorites, subclasses that are really great for the villain of a story. The lore and sometimes the abilities gel really well with making a character that your players will love to hate. So let's take a look at them. So these are in no particular order, just 5 that I think are really good candidates. Now, of course, any subclass could be used, but I think these 5 lend themselves to being great villains. And the first is the champion fighter. Now, I know the champion fighter is not a beloved subclass for player characters. It does not offer a lot of different abilities. It is too minimal in what it offers to a player. But for a villain, it offers quite a bit in terms of the capacity, the ease of running it at the table, and the story you can build. The champion fighter is a champion of a cause, or, and I think this is equally important, the champion of a crown or a kingdom. There are a lot of villains in stories who are not the person in charge of a particular empire or organization, but the person second in charge, the person who goes to the front lines, who engages with the heroes of the story. Darth Vader is a perfect example. He's not in charge of the empire. He's second or third in charge of this organizational structure, and he's the one the players deal with. He's the combatant that they have to confront up until they finally face the Emperor. And the champion fighter can serve that role. It's easy to run and allows you to have a player, have a character that is simply dedicated to whatever the evil cause of your villains is. They crit twice as often as most players, and if you create this as a 15th level character, they crit on an 18, 19, or 20. They get an additional fighting style, meaning that you can build them to have really a nice package of offensive capacities. Just like any fighter, they're going to get multiple attacks on every round. And of course, you can build them with whatever combination of polearm master, great weapon master, or sharpshooter, or crossbow expert that you would prefer for your villain. Fighters are unbelievably flexible characters, as we all know. The champion fighter is wonderful in this respect and allows for some great role-playing opportunities. You want to have that great evil villain that is up in a tower. The champion fighter can be the one on the front line pushing forward the cause, the person who is almost religiously dedicated to this thing, whatever it is, that your players are actively working against. The second subclass that I think is just absolutely rife with roleplay and story potential for a villain at your table is going to be one of the wizards. And I know that the temptation is simply to go necromancy wizard. And that's a classic trope. The idea of the necromancer raising an undead army and sending waves of zombies and skeletons at your players is a great story image. You can do it at relatively low levels, and it's fun and engaging. And if you want to go that direction, do it. You'll have a great time. There are other great wizard options. The Divination Wizard would be fantastic because the Divination Wizard allows you to cast multiple scrying and other intelligence-based gathering capacities and regain spell slots and have an intelligence leg up against your players. But for me, for story purposes, I think the best wizard to be a villain is the Enchantment Wizard. I love the Enchantment Wizard. It is remarkably powerful and really hits this great trope that's in stories of the wizard that is controlling things from the shadows and from behind the scenes. If you take a look at it, Jafar from Aladdin is an enchantment wizard, not a necromancer. And it's really a great story to examine. Let's see what they get. The Enchantment Wizard, first off, has the Hypnotic Gaze ability, which allows him to simply shut down one combatant on the field. It does require his action and his movement every turn in order to maintain it, but there are no additional saving throws against the ability. He can simply shut somebody down. Really powerful feature. At slightly higher levels, he gets Instinctive Charm, which simply allows him to be able to redirect attacks. And that allows this wizard to be able to be in the thick of battle and, like having waves part around him, have attacks simply start missing him. Really, really exciting stuff. But where it gets truly exciting is at level 14, your Enchantment Wizard gets to alter memories, cast Suggestion, Charm Person, and the people around him don't know the effect happened. And that's where I think that this wizard becomes amazingly powerful. Build your Enchantment Wizard at 14th level or above, controlling the people around him through Suggestion and Charm Person and other enchantment spells. And if interrogated, these NPCs will have no idea that the effect happened. None. They'll think that whatever they did was truly their idea. And as a result, this Enchantment Wizard can really be a behind-the-scenes character and emerge at opportune moments to stab the players in the back. It's a wonderful trope and really exciting to put into your game. So the third subclass that's going to be wonderful to create a villain around is going to be one of the rogues, and I know it's so tempting to go Assassin Rogue here. In fact, the Assassin Rogue is such a good villain that it has a stat block in the monster manual, and if you want to run assassins inside of your game, I think you should. I've done it myself and they're incredibly fun. There's nothing quite like having the assassin drop down out of nowhere and sneak attack one of your players without any warning whatsoever. It's a great moment. But is the assassin a great villain for a longer story arc? And I don't know that it is. I think other rogues could be better for larger villains. Certainly one that's going to get an honorable mention here is the Swashbuckler Rogue, which has a better ability to consistently land sneak attack than just about any other rogue out there, and is fun to roleplay and could really be a character that runs a marauding army or perhaps is the captain of a pirate vessel. But for me, the rogue that I think makes the best villain is the Soul Knife. The Soul Knife is a wonderful subclass, and if you haven't taken a look at its abilities, you really should. They get some great things. The Soul Knife has a defining feature of the ability to conjure in his or her hand a psychic blade. This psychic blade can be used in melee, but it does have the thrown property. As soon as it is thrown and hits or misses with an attack, it vanishes, and the Soul Knife can simply conjure another one. What this means is your Soul Knife is never unarmed. You want to have that great villain that is part of high society, that controls things in the spotlight, but seems to not be particularly dangerous himself. You want a Soul Knife. Your wizards and your other spellcasters can determine, is this character carrying magic items or casting spells? And the Soul Knife isn't. He's not a spellcaster. It'll look like somebody who's unarmed and can't cast spells. But at a moment's notice, the Soul Knife can conjure a psychic blade, which does psychic damage, which is almost never resisted in D&D, particularly by players, and stab somebody in the back. It's a wonderful ability. At later levels, the Soul Knife is able to throw a psionic blade and teleport to wherever it lands, giving your Soul Knife villain great mobility. Of course, all rogues get expertise, and if you want to make your Soul Knife rogue villain unbelievably sneaky and able to pick locks like every other rogue, go for it. It is completely above board. And at high levels, 13th level specifically, the Soul Knife gets Psychic Veil, which allows him to turn invisible. So your Soul Knife villain can turn invisible and maneuver things behind the scenes, can teleport whenever that they want, allowing them to break out of prison, for instance, and of course can summon blades at a moment's notice in order to commit dastardly murders. This conjures the great villain that is part of high society, that seems to be a weakling in and of himself, from the player's point of view, that if they could just get to him, he'll be pretty easy to take care of. Even though he seems to be perhaps rich and powerful, he's not really a monster in the classic combat sense. But the second that he has an opportunity, he can assassinate somebody, and I think he can assassinate them better than the assassin rogue. Soul Knives are great. Put one into your game, and you're going to have a great high society villain. The next subclass that I think makes a great villain is the College of Spirits Bard. This is a lot of fun. The College of Spirits Bard is unlike the bards that you regularly see that are eloquence or lore, that are playing music on instruments or telling poems or stories. These are the bards that do seances, that commune with spirits from other worlds and from beyond the grave, offering up a character that gathers followers almost in a religious cult sense and can guide and control those around him through these mystical connections. So this is a villain that's not going to be that great in combat himself, but might have people around him that are the combat unit of the force that he controls. And of course, bards inside of combat are really great at being able to buff their allies, debuff their enemies, and give bardic inspiration to their allies. But it goes farther than that. The College of Whispers Bard, being something that offers up images of seances and contacting other planes, has the ability to use his bardic inspiration to tell stories of creation and life beyond the grave. Let's take a look at this ability because it bears some examination. Right away at 3rd level, the College of Spirits Bard gets Tales from Beyond, which allows him to roll his bardic inspiration dice on a table, and that produces an effect that he can utilize once before rolling on the table again. Now, many of these are defensive based. They grant temporary hit points or they restore health, but there are some that are wonderful tales of brutality that do psychic damage or thunder damage to the enemies that are on a battlefield. And imagine being able to write up these stories beforehand and tell them at the table and actually create these moments for your players. It's a great way of being able to weave some theme and some imagery into the combat scenarios that you have. Do you want your villain to perhaps have an opportunity to, rules as written, learn all kinds of different spells? Well, the College of Spirits Bard has your back. You have at 6th level Spirit Session, which allows the bard to do an hour-long seance or ritual, which is really a fun thing to imagine, and have them learn a spell to be able to use once as a gift from the spirits. Very, very fun, very thematic, totally worth doing. Once your College of Spirits Bard hits 14th level, they get to roll twice on the table to determine what kind of a story they learn, giving you a little bit more flexibility in which one of these abilities you want to utilize at the table, what kind of a story you want to implore. especially if one of your PCs has scrying and starts scrying on the villain. You can scry on seances, ghosts and whispers coming through walls, and them telling stories of supernatural events, and add a lot of flavor and theme to your campaign. But lastly, we're going to come to one that I have a particular fondness for. This is a subclass I'm using as a villain in my campaign right now, and that is the Circle of Spores Druid. We don't think about druids as villains very often. This whole nature hippie vibe that they give off is oftentimes thought of simply as being a wholesome, heroic character. Maybe not a lawful good character, but certainly a good character. And there's no reason it has to be that way. Any druid could make a very good villain, but the Spores Druid in particular seems to steer right into this idea. If you want to have something that corrupts the land around him, Circle of Spores Druid. If you want to homebrew abominations and you want to have the idea of being a mad scientist experimenting on nature and creating abominations, Circle of Spores Druid. It's a great subclass, and it gives a lot of theme and flavor, right? The Circle of Spores Druid is surrounded by a cloud of spores. I imagine rot and mold growing up his or her armor, and being surrounded by rats carrying plague. And the Circle of Spores Druid, beyond just good flavor, has some fun abilities that lend themselves to being a villain. First of all, the spell list is great. Circle of Spores Druid gets some amazing spells. They get Chill Touch, Blindness, Deafness, Animate Dead, Blight, and Cloud Kill as added druid spells. These are very thematic, and they're really nice combat skills. First of all, at level 2, you get the Halo of Spores feature. This is going to allow your villainous druid to just have spores surrounding them. If something comes into a melee reach with it for your druid, you can use your reaction to just have the spores deal damage to them. This damage scales at higher levels. If you want your villainous druid to also do melee combat damage, then you could utilize the Symbiotic Entity ability, which is going to allow your spores to power your melee attacks to deal extra necrotic damage. Here's a beautifully fun and wonderfully thematic ability of the Circle of Spores Druid. At level 6, they get Fungal Infestation, where the Circle of Spores is able to simply animate a corpse. And now you get rotting animated corpses that are helping to fuel the battlefield. It's thematic, it's powerful, and it just gives the right tone to this horrifying villain. Lastly, if your evil druid is a high enough level, then the spores around them prevent them from being blinded, being deafened, being frightened, or being poisoned. What's not to love about this subclass? There are wonderfully powerful spells that they get to cast. They can animate dead things around them. They have this wonderful spore ability which attacks anything that's in melee range. This is a fun subclass and makes a great villain. All right, that is 5 subclasses I particularly love for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition to be villains in a campaign. Have you had a great success building a playable character to be a villain in your campaign? What was the subclass? What was the ability that really made that exciting for you? I'd love to hear about it. As always, YouTube is literally made out of buttons. They're all over here for you to press, and until next time, enjoy your games.